Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you're listening from. Welcome to the Change Management Simplified podcast, where we will explain and discuss what change management is really about, using real examples alongside principles of change management based on our experiences on projects, transformations, change initiatives, and of course, the home experiences as well. Episode that we're doing today should at least give you that motivation to click that follow button. And also, please do add a comment if you're enjoying what I'm producing out there or publishing. Please add a comment to just give me that encouragement, that motivation to continue going. This is my hobby. I am seeing the numbers going up in terms of followers, but I don't see any comments. Well, I have seen a couple of comments, but I would like to know more what you guys think. If you're enjoying, please add a comment to say, yes, I am enjoying. Please follow, please subscribe. Now, today, I do have an interesting topic to bring to the table. As you can hear my voice, I am smiling as I speak because it's a topic that I've been meaning and wanting to have, but I needed someone credible and someone close to the topic itself to have a conversation about it with me. And before we do that, I would like to give credit to Channel 4, who actually premiered a documentary about Swipe the School that bans smartphones, including the lead presenters, which is Matt and Emma Willis, who Emma went through the emotions, the highs and lows. I don't know how many boxes of tissues that she went through, but she had her husband there to cry, the shoulder to cry on. And also, I'd like to give credit and thanks to the Stanway School for taking part in this experiment, because it was vital for us as adults to see this visually, in regards to the impact this has on the kids, but also the school itself. But for me, it's about the impact it has on building their soft skills, because it's during this early stages of their childhood that they can start to build on their soft skills to prepare them for adulthood. Because the older you go, the more you need those soft skills to interact, to lead people, to have debates, to be able to discuss, to be able to construct an argument, and without you being offended in some way, to have a balanced discussion. And I won't spoil it for everyone. However, I would like to also ask you to push through this episode, or to share with your families, your friends, your colleagues, because it is a topic we have to have. I observe senior stakeholders struggling with the application of soft skills. You can find that they're really great technically. However, when it comes to leading people, they struggle, and some of them fail, unfortunately, and and some of them just find hard to relate to people coming from different backgrounds and audiences. And yet, the higher you go up that triangle, the more soft skills, especially effective communication, becomes critical and fundamental to your success. So, are we doing our children justice by occupying them on devices and not putting them in those scenarios where they have to actively work and develop on their soft skills, their social skills? Or can the government help us put some regulations as well? This is the topic on the table, on everyone's table, in every household, and we don't know what to do about it. So I'm hoping this is the beginning. So today's episode is continuing from where Channel 4 left off, but we will give you some context of what actually happened. So I do have Mr. John Player with me, the head of school from the Stanway School that took part in the experiment, having this discussion with me. And on that note, over to the discussion. Hi, everybody, and welcome back to the Change Management Simplified podcast. And today I'm excited to let you know that actually I do have an exciting guest, one that I've been looking forward to over this Christmas period, and his name is John Player. or Mr. John Player. I'm going to use Mr. John Player because he is the head teacher. I keep saying head teacher, but you've got, is it
It's
headmaster, head of
it's
school?
head of school role, so it's slightly different. It's more the day-to-day running of the school
Okay.
within a
So
larger
he,
trust capacity. So yeah,
okay, so he's the head of school for the Stanway School that featured on the Channel 4 program, Swipe, the school that banned smartphones.
that's the
I have
one.
been looking for a school or a teacher or representative to discuss this topic because, as you know, on this podcast, we discuss change management scenarios as well as leadership scenarios, both at work and in our normal lives. And today I bring you the school scenario around the school that banned smartphones. Um, the reason I bring this topic here is because of the element around soft skills. You've all heard me discuss the importance of soft skills as a leader. And in my current role as a change management practitioner, I see a lot of senior stakeholders struggle with soft skills. But the higher you go up in your career, and I know you're listening to this episode because you're learning on how to develop and how to grow as a leader, your soft skills, 80% of your soft skills are key to your success. And you spend a lot of your time applying soft skills rather than your technical or SME, your specialist skills that you've learned through books on the role and how to lead people. But before we get into detail, let me let Mr. John Player, introduce himself, and also we will get into the discussion. So, John, over to you.
Well, thank you. So I'm John Platt. I'm the head of school at Stanway School. I've been head of school for about a year and a half now. Previously working at the school as a deputy head teacher, and alarmingly, I've been in education for more than 20 years now.
Oh,
So
wow.
done a number of roles across a number of schools in Essex, and yeah, I've made it to this point so far. So very happy with that.
Oh, wow. Well, thank you for working in education for 20 years.
That's gone a lot quicker than I thought it was going to as well.
Really? Well, that means you're still enjoying the role because
Yeah,
if someone enjoys the roles, time flies, and also it's giving you the challenge, I guess, you look for in it gives you basically job satisfaction in what you're doing.
absolutely.
Oh, that's great. So today, John, I wanted to focus our discussion around a couple of points. One of the questions we're going to try and get from you is how did you prepare the parents and the teachers involved in the experiment that you did with Channel 4? And then the second question that I would also want us to discuss is how did you prepare the students prior to the experiment? And then the progress you've made and any pitfalls and lessons learned that you've observed through this experiment and where you're at as a school, just to share the knowledge with other schools and other head teachers that might be listening to this, because this is a topic that I've mentioned to a few people and they're like, I'm ready to listen. So it will be shared around by various listeners with their schools, hopefully as well.
No
So
worries.
how did you prepare the let's start with the parents because they are tricky, the tricky stakeholder group.
It is, yeah. Well, I mean, the first thing that we did is we've got a grounding in education for these types of documentaries to be made previously. So there's been, I think it's Channel 4 that actually did Educate in Essex, for example. So actually,
Mm,
we've got a sort of a baseline where people know the types of things that they actually do. But although this was similar people that worked on the Educate in Essex programs, this was a different type of documentary. So the first thing is the time spans that the whole thing starts with is very, very short. So we learnt about the process really late May, start having the real conversations with everybody in the production team in June. Bear in mind we go on holiday in the middle of July, and it's all
mhm.
got to happen in September. So the turnaround is very, very quick. And the production company were excellent at this. Boldprint Studios just been absolutely fantastic in helping us through every single stage of this. But for the parents, it's essentially trying to make sure they understand the rationale in the first place. There's limits as to how much we're allowed to tell them because of the way production companies work and how they want to keep things quiet and make sure that they're not usurped by somebody else doing a similar sort of project. But essentially, it's the rationale behind it which is the biggest focus, because you've got to try and sell it at the end of the day to the parent body as to why it is you feel it's important to do. So the basics behind that was we wanted to find out from the beginning of the whole project, we were interested in the science behind this.
Mm.
Because I suppose anecdotally, we all understand the impact of mobile phones. We understand that, especially in the post-COVID world, the impact of technology on young people had become very significant. And in our work in schools, pastoral side in particular, we've been finding more and more issues that are happening outside of school through mobile phone usage
Yeah.
creeping into their school day.
Yeah.
So we had a reasonable rationale as to why we felt it was important to look into this before the actual production company even came with anything. So it's then just communicating that effectively with the parents and giving them a chance to actually ask those questions.
Yeah.
Because as soon as you start saying about a TV company coming into a school, there's a lot of safeguarding questions that have to immediately be answered. You need a good team around you at that point. You can't do everything yourself. And in no way can I ever claim that I was part of this without a number of other people working with me. My deputies in particular, Rachel and Crystal, did phenomenal work with this. And actually, the production company, that communication you have with them, the meetings we have with them, the face-to-face meetings are always going to be more productive than the online meetings. And actually making sure that you give enough turnaround for people to be able to come back and ask some of those questions about, I don't want my child to be part of this. What are you going to do about it? Okay, we have our plans put in place already. No child that is not allowed to be part of this program will be a part of this program in any way, shape, or form. But recognizing that this is an exciting time for the school, an exciting project to be part of.
Yeah.
And actually, we wanted to find out as much as anybody else what the results of those experiments would really be. So that sales pitch behind the process is really important when it comes to the parents.
Well, it's interesting you say that because there's one parent in particular who was really well on the program. He looked very excited and looking forward to the experiment for their son. And I think halfway through, well, he did say he was a little bit, anxious and kind of, doesn't know how it's going to be because his son spends, on the phone most of the time. However, and I'm hoping I don't spoil it for people who haven't watched it yet, but at the end of it, I love the fact that he said, I am going to miss it. I think it was a 3 weeks experiment. I am going to miss it because it was nice to have my son back, you know, and they showed them at home and they were playing games, at home. And I love that because to me, what that experiment demonstrated that yes, as parents, we would like our children to have these devices, these smartphones. However, we also have to create time to invest time in spending time with them. But also he had to change his mindset and also come up with games to play, just
Yeah.
interactive activities to do after school for the son not to get bored without the phone.
I mean, the reality is, as adults, I think we're as tethered to these devices as the children are,
We are.
possibly in different ways.
Mm.
And I think that was one of the interesting things for us was to just to find out how much we are tethered to these devices, both as children, but also us that gave up our phones as adults as well, just to find out how easily we can cope with it, how reliant upon it we are,
Yeah.
how addicted to it we are, because actually there is an element to this is an addiction. It's maybe not an addiction in the sort of traditional sense of alcohol or drugs or things like that, but it's an addiction in our time. And also it 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 has become a part of our normal life without us necessarily stopping and thinking about whether we were happy with that. So it was really interesting to be able to take this opportunity for the children and for some of us as adults and for us as a school to sort of step back from this largely intensive digital world for just 3 weeks and actually reevaluate what our relationship is with those devices.
And you're saying that, and I remember watching Emma. Emma was broken. She went through all different emotions, as a parent, but also a person listening and hearing the results. They went through different emotions, and I just love their reactions or, afterthoughts after the experiment and during the experiment, what they decided to do for their children with all those devices. So and I love the word you've used is addiction. And it's true, we are addicted to these mobile devices. Look, I don't know how many devices I have around me right now,
Yeah.
which is not a good thing, the fact that we're talking about this particular topic. And there was a scenario where, in the clip, where one of your teachers at the end of the day the cameras were following him around, and they asked him, oh, he was supposed to be doing something, and he was just like, oh, where's my phone? And he was, looking for his phone in his pocket, and he goes, oh no, yes, sorry, it's in the, I've locked it up.
Yeah, it's we're so used to it. And actually, I think from my own perspective, before we started the experiment, I had to actually go and actively change some things. I had to go and buy an alarm clock because it's my alarm clock. I had to go and buy some CDs so I've got something to listen to in the car because I use my streaming services,
Oh,
and it's the little things like that. So you become very conscious of phone usage when you actually step back from it. And we all see it when we're out in restaurants, and we see, unfortunately, we do see far too many people at the same table with their phones out in front of each
yeah,
other, not necessarily communicating. We sort of sit back and go, oh, that's not very good. But actually, that's quite a common thing now on a day-to-day basis in people's homes up and down the country. For adults, we have a number of things that the devices are useful for. We use them for banking, for maps. We use them for our social lives. We use them for social interaction. We use them for functional purposes as well, games and all sorts of things. But actually, for children, they don't have many of those needs.
yeah,
So actually, their entire relationship with that device is their social connections. And when we stop and think about that, it's something that it doesn't sit very comfortable to have the primary influence over your social connections to be through a small device.
yeah. It's quite
Because
worrying.
actually, if you think about those children, when they grow up, what their memory's going to be of their family time. It's not when they all sat around and played a game on a device together. It's
Yeah,
going to be the Monopoly game when so and so got really annoyed and walked
yeah,
out. It's going to be the football match. It's going to be the time they spend when they're actually connecting with people.
yeah,
And that's one of the reasons why we were so keen on the whole experiment, because we sort of stumbled. And Dr. Chatterjee talks about this phrase he uses, which is stumbling into a mental health crisis.
it is.
And
I agree
actually,
with
we
that.
have stumbled into the use of these devices and the addiction and almost the subservience to these devices
Yeah,
without stopping to think about it. So we were very interested to find out just how strong that relationship was with adults and children with those devices. And then from our point of view, one of the key things, which was again the sales pitch that we sort of directed to the parents, was to find out and to bring this whole conversation out to the forefront rather than it happening in every individual home by themselves, trying to figure out what the right course is, what they should do, what they understand and what they don't understand. Because we anecdotally, again, we knew of lots of parents feeling peer pressure as
yeah,
adults as to when to get their child the phone,
yeah,
as to what to allow their child to have, at what age do you allow Snapchat, at what age do you allow TikTok.
yeah,
And these conversations are being had in isolation because people felt the peer pressure and the judgment of society that you should do these things. And so, actually, the age in which students have been getting phones has crept ever and ever lower to the point where actually it's now becoming a more significant issue in primary schools. So, for us,
yes.
when you put the whole thing together, the experiment, at that point, we just thought it was a little documentary. It was planned to be a 1 hour program, and that was about it. And the idea was like, this is a really interesting thing to do. And then this whole thing became a lot bigger than we'd ever even thought about. So
No, it's one of the best programs that they've done in a long time. One that's relevant and it's appropriate, and it's timely for us to have this discussion
mm,
because a lot of parents are having that the peer pressure that you're actually, talking or mentioning, but also the schools themselves. They want to do what's right and get the balance right for the parents and also for the students. You've mentioned one of the points you just mentioned was, the age that I'll continue to say we because we adults are the ones who are providing the devices.
yeah, we
You
buy
know,
them.
the age that I won't even call them students, so the children are getting devices is getting lower and lower. And within the program, there is a part where I don't remember the doctor's name, but he was a pediatrician, and he was very candid and very firm to say that what he sees now, toddlers coming in for their checkups, they're behind their verbal or communication development skills because
Yeah,
most of these kids, we give them devices to distract them while we're doing something else.
yeah.
Now, we're not saying anyone doing this is being a bad parent. We're just saying this is something that we're contributing to, but how do we navigate through this change while we can still give the opportunity to our children to develop as they should while they develop. For example, a child, being delayed in speaking. As a parent, you will get quite worried. You start getting worried quite quickly. But if you know you could contribute to this by giving them devices at an early age and keeping them on these devices for long hours, then it will, when you see such results, it kind of makes you think twice. You kind of think, okay, I might just reduce the amount of time that I give, to this toddler, the iPad to play with. It's just those little things that just make you
Yeah.
think twice.
Well, I think generationally, we've had this over the last sort of 50 years, I suppose. Because, when we were growing up, TV was the one. And the question about how much TV children should be watching and how long they should be spending in front of the TV became the big question.
Yeah.
And then TV expanded very quickly with Sky Television and streaming
Netflix
services.
now.
And now it's become a point where actually TV in its old-fashioned format is now very different. On demand has become the process. Then we had the sort of phase with computer games and computers and how long they should be spending on a computer game. And we sort of recognized as a society that sort of silent, non-verbal, non-interactive element with other people on a screen for an extended period of time wasn't healthy. But again, those games have expanded and the types of machines have expanded so much and it's become a normal part of everyday life. But we never paused long enough when mobile phones happened.
No, we
And
haven't.
the mobile phone development has been so rapid that actually it opened up not just that single access point. So with TV, you only had one single access, which was the television. With computer games, you only had that same one single access. Whereas with mobile phones or tablets, you've got access to absolutely everything.
Yeah.
And the reality is there are something like more than 500 minutes of video being uploaded to YouTube every single minute in the UK. So
That's crazy.
So the scope has expanded beyond our controls.
Yeah.
Well, as an adult, we know that there are healthy and unhealthy elements to those relationships, and we try and set ourselves boundaries. But with children, they're growing up in a world where that's already the norm. So actually the idea of spending that amount of time on a computer screen or a TV or on a mobile has now become the norm. So actually we've got to go back and look at some of those boundaries again.
I totally agree. And that leads us to our next question, which is, or discussion point, which is, how did you prepare your students to give up their phones? Was it for 3 weeks?
It's interesting because we've got sort of 3 layers of students that we need to talk about. First of all, you've got the entire school, which were aware that it was happening, but due to the style of the documentary, it was only a small crew. So there were only about 4 or 5 people in per day. We didn't have the sort of fixed cameras and fixed points that you have with an Educating Essex program or something like that. So actually, initially, preparing the whole school that these people are going to be in, you have to get past the initial surprise and shock and, oh my word, it's a TV company and everyone playing up to the cameras. And I do remember, I think one of the first days they tried to do some corridor shots, which are just a little, I think they're called transition shots. And it went completely wrong because everyone's immediately looking at the cameras and playing up to the cameras. So you have to almost factor in some time for the school to get used to it. And then when they did, they just started ignoring them, which is brilliant because then you get the real program.
Yeah.
You then get the ones that volunteer. So we had a volunteer basis for this. So we opened it up to the whole of a year group. So it's the whole of year 8 because the age they were looking at was 12 to 13-year-olds. Because that's the age at which they actually are legally allowed to have the Snapchats and the TikTok. So therefore it's the age range that they're most interested in for the documentary purpose. So we open it up to everybody. We explain what the situation is going to be. We explain what the process is going to be. And then essentially it's a volunteer basis.
Okay.
You then have to start the filtering process because the child that volunteers to do this might not necessarily be the child that should be doing this. Because what has to sit behind all of this is the safeguarding considerations of the child and the family around that child as well. We have to make sure that they're robust. So we work with our heads of year, we work with our pastoral teams to discuss every single student that had put themselves forward to this and that as family had put themselves forward, discuss about whether or not they would be appropriate, whether or not they would cope. It wasn't a case of we only choose those that will cope because if they're willing to do it and the family's behind it, but we don't think they're going to be able to cope with it, that's kind of what the experiment shows as well. So that was perfectly fine. But obviously, where we have children that potentially are looked after, that maybe have particular safeguarding concerns within the family, that maybe there are some children that they commute from a reasonable distance, or they have particular needs for outside of school, that means that not having a mobile phone for 3 weeks could potentially be a risk to them.
Yeah.
That's where those discussion points happen as well.
Yeah.
And then the production company then step in at that particular point. And what they did is they had a very robust series of interviews with the children and the families, using psychologists to make sure that the production company were happy that they were emotionally robust enough to be able to cope with the whole process, to make sure they've got the support behind them, to make sure that the family life is stable enough that they can actually cope with this extra change. Because,
Yeah.
there are some children that things are already difficult enough for them, and they don't necessarily need to have this extra pressure coming onto them at the time. And also making sure that we're conscious and aware of the issues that can come out after the documentary, issues of teasing, bullying, whatever else it might be.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of factors that we then have to go through to actually set this process up. But the reality is, I don't think any of them really knew what it was going to be like until it happened. And you can see that because even in the launch program, where Emma and Matt came in and reminded them what they're about to give up. Some of them
Yeah.
were really quite distraught at just the
Yeah,
idea of
they
having to
were.
lose their Snapchat streak and things like that.
They
So
were.
I think, which was again part of the reason why we're so enticed by this, because I think nobody really knows what it was going to be like until it happened. But the safeguarding procedures around preparing the children, that was the most important to everybody. And then
Yes.
afterwards as well, in the editing process, what we had to do is robustly check every single frame of editing. We had viewings for myself and for my safeguarding team for us to check that we were happy with what's been produced. We had to check every single scene and identify every single child involved at all points during all scenes, even in background shots, to make sure that they had the authorizations to be on camera. And if they didn't, the scene had to be cut and a different scene had to be used. So there were huge amounts of processes that had to go on behind things. And then obviously, Channel 4 also had legal teams involved in this. So there were parts of the documentary that I remember on the first viewing that were quite fun and quite interesting, that Channel 4 then said, I don't think we should do that. There is the potential for that maybe coming back on the child and the family in a negative way. It doesn't help the program. It's just anecdotal. It's just transition work. We can remove that, put something else in. It'll still have just the same effect.
Wow, it's incredible. But it's when you mentioned the initial meeting that you had with Emma, or the launch meeting that you had with Emma and the students, and their reactions were incredible. But then after they came out of that launch meeting, it was interesting to hear the students' conversations where they were like, "What am I gonna do now?" Well, there was a moment for self-reflection, which kind of comes across like they haven't had that,
Oh, I
in a
think we
while.
all had that, especially the first day.
Yeah.
From my own situation, you constantly feel like there's something missing, especially in that first day. And it's the casuality that you notice, that the second the TV adverts were on, I reach for a phone, because you do it naturally now, and you just quickly check this and you quickly check that. The fact that when you get up in the morning, you reach for the phone, it's worrying, but we do it.
Yes.
Unless we put some of those
First thing.
boundaries in place, which is one of the things that was so positive about the whole documentary, starting to discuss the things like where you charge your phone, and having time limits on things, and having parental controls, things that many parents and many families probably hadn't thought about. And I know, Emma and Matt themselves were very conscious of what they were doing, and brought
Yeah.
in some changes as they go through, because things such as charging your phone downstairs. I had a conversation with Emma and Matt at the very start of the whole project, and we all basically agreed that that's a really good way for us all to go. So we all
Yeah.
have our children charging their phones at a set time downstairs away from their bedrooms, because the reality is more and more the problems that young people are having in pastoral terms, with relationships, with access to inappropriate material, with sharing inappropriate content, most of that happens when they're alone in a bedroom.
Yeah.
So the reality is, it's a simple measure, but it's a very sensible measure. It's having an off switch, and any off switch of something that children like or something that adults like, it's always going to hurt to start with. But actually, it's a routine that if you get used to it, it can become a very, very powerful and very helpful thing.
Yeah. No, that's actually a very good suggestion, and I'm actually going to try that myself. I
But
just
it's
was,
it's habit for me. That's the problem.
yeah,
It's making
and
sure that
they
we're just recognizing that we need to do a few better habits. And that was the thing for us. So yeah, the point we were recognizing, we weren't trying to say smartphones are evil because they're not. There's huge brilliance that can come with young people, adults having these devices. What we're saying is that unregulated smartphones are dangerous. And actually, whether that regulation comes from the individual themselves, whether it comes through the family and the parents, whether it's through schools and how we organise our days and our structures and our regulations and rules, or whether it comes from the tech companies and from the government. There needs to be more regulation than there is at the moment. I think that was very clear with the whole process, because actually unregulated, some of the statistics, some of the things that young people could access, it's just not right. It's
it's
as simple as
And on that note, we come to the end of episode 1. In episode 2, we will continue where Mr. John Player discusses the impact on the kids or on the children, the lessons learned for the schools, what they had to do to change as well, because or what they're doing to try and change appropriately and effectively. And then he also discusses how the government can help with, with regulation. What can they do? Um, I know I've had recently on the BBC, some parents are preparing to make the technology companies such as TikTok more accountable for what's happened to their children. And also, we will also discuss what can we do as adults to raise and push this topic even further. It's an issue we have to address. We have to give our children an opportunity to start developing better soft skills, because the older they get, the more they need them, the more they become fundamental. And it'll help us reduce some mental health symptoms or issues that we're starting to foresee now. They're increasing at a higher rate, as you've heard me in the previous episode. See you next week. If you find this podcast beneficial or interesting, please press follow, like, or subscribe. Lastly, and of course, don't forget to spread the word by sharing. Thank you for listening.